Breaking news, FBI and ICE take down drug cartel in San Antonio, Rio. Dirty sheriff and cartel leaders arrested. Now let's get into the details.
How a city could wake up believing everything was normal, only to realize in a single violent second that the very institutions sworn to protect them had already collapsed from the inside. At exactly 4:30 a.m., when most of San Antonio was still asleep, the sky split open with the roar of Black Hawk helicopters, armored convoys, and coordinated federal teams sweeping through the streets with absolute precision. What looked like a military invasion was in truth a desperate attempt to contain a truth far more corrosive. The sheriff leading the county's narcotics division had become the architect of its downfall. This moment, the first 15 seconds of the operation, was the point where illusion and reality finally collided. And if the viewer wants to understand how a badge, once a symbol of honor, turned into the passport of a criminal empire, then they must stay for what comes next, because the real story hasn't even started yet. Parallel to the financial audit field, intelligence units reconstructed the drug pipeline feeding into Texas. Shipments originated in Guadalajara moved through Nuevo Laredo, then crossed the border concealed inside trucks belonging to legitimate companies such as Loner Freight and Blue Horizon Logistics. By day, they delivered produce. By night, their trailers carried concealed compartments packed with cocaine and methamphetamine. GPS logs revealed an alarming pattern. The truck's routes synchronized perfectly with the sheriff's patrol units. This was not coincidence, it was coordination. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer the pattern became. Rojas and several deputies were linked to encrypted messages confirming safe passage clearance, while camera logs showed temporary surveillance blackouts before every convoy. These findings forced federal agencies to expand the operation across counties and states, uncovering additional officers, border inspectors, and even ICE personnel connected to the Eclipse network. The investigation no longer targeted a corrupt sheriff, it targeted an integrated criminal infrastructure. If viewers want to understand why federal agencies mobilized one of the largest coordinated raids in recent history, they must move on to the next section, because once the full network was mapped, the government had only one choice: strike everywhere at once. But one truth stands firm here: corruption does not spread by accident, it spreads by design. He knew that once investigators understood the full scope of the Eclipse network, there was only one possible response: overwhelming force deployed with absolute synchronization. The corruption was too embedded, the money too vast, and the protection too fortified for a simple arrest. What unfolded next was one of the most aggressive multi-agency operations in recent US history, an operation designed not to disrupt the network, but to erase it entirely. If viewers want to understand how federal power looks when aimed at a criminal empire hidden inside government structures, they must follow this section closely, because what happened next would reshape Texas law enforcement for years. At precisely 5:00 a.m. on April 2nd, 2025, the federal government launched Operation Eclipse Counterstrike. More than 700 agents from DEA, FBI, ICE, and US Marshals moved across Texas, Florida, and satellite hubs in a simultaneous assault. 28 SWAT teams and 17 Black Hawk helicopters lifted off in unison, each heading toward targets identified through decrypted Eclipse files, shell companies, drug warehouses, cartel-linked mansions, and corrupted law enforcement offices. The objective was simple: strike all nodes faster than the network could react. In Miami, agents breached a luxury mansion functioning as a financial vault, where millions were stored beneath marble flooring. In Tampa, teams raided a warehouse owned by Sunshine Freight Logistics, one of the companies implicated in nighttime drug transport. Inside, they found industrial-scale operations with tons of methamphetamine prepped for distribution. But the most violent confrontation occurred back in San Antonio, where private contractors hired by Rojas attempted to defend the fortified casino compound. A 9-minute armed standoff erupted, resulting in 4 deaths and 9 arrests before the final perimeter collapsed. This moment confirmed what federal analysts already feared: the sheriff had effectively militarized parts of his operation. Throughout Texas, convoys of armored vehicles blocked highway exits, while agents seized trucks belonging to companies identified in the Eclipse mapping. Surveillance drones hovered over ranches, warehouses, and abandoned industrial blocks, any location listed in the intercepted communications. Communications were jammed, streets were sealed, and residents woke up once again to the sound of helicopters and tactical teams moving with surgical precision. This was the response required when the enemy operated from within the system itself. The simultaneous raids prevented suspects from warning each other, wiping out safe houses, financial nodes, and transit routes within hours. If viewers want to understand how devastating the impact was, the next section reveals the sheer volume of drugs, weapons, and assets uncovered numbers that shocked even seasoned agents. But before moving forward, one truth stands firm: when corruption infects every layer, justice must strike every layer at once. He understood that every major federal operation is ultimately judged not only by the arrests made, but by the numbers, the physical evidence that exposes the true scale of the criminal empire. And when the results of Operation Eclipse Counterstrike were finally compiled, even veteran agents who had spent decades dismantling cartel networks were stunned. This was not the aftermath of a small-town corruption case. It was the forensic footprint of a parallel system that had operated in plain sight. If viewers want to grasp how deeply the Eclipse network had penetrated Texas and beyond, they must pay attention here, because the numbers speak louder than any confession. Across all targeted locations, federal teams seized 2.7 tons of narcotics, including methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl, making it the largest single-week drug seizure recorded in that year. The fentanyl alone, disguised in prescription-style pill bottles, represented enough lethal doses to devastate multiple cities. Alongside the drugs, agents recovered 133 firearms, many of them military-grade, stored in hidden compartments inside warehouses and private offices. These weapons were not merely tools for protection. They were symbols of an operation that had grown bold enough to prepare for armed resistance even against American law enforcement. From above, thermal cameras tracked movement across industrial complexes, motel rooftops, and a hidden casino that served as the financial heart of an operation moving drugs, weapons, and money across 3 states. Federal agents did not arrive to chase low-level smugglers. They came to neutralize an internal power structure protected for years by the very people meant to enforce the law. Sheriff Miguel Rojas, wearing his full uniform, was pulled from a building fortified like a cartel bunker, complete with encrypted servers, cash crates, and cocaine package for transit. The badge on his chest no longer reflected authority. It reflected greed, betrayal, and the collapse of public trust. That is the brutal simplicity of the opening scene. The protectors had become the predators. The financial findings were equally staggering. More than $9.4 million in cash was found stacked in plastic crates, locked safes, and false floor compartments from Miami to San Antonio. Federal auditors also located gold bars, encrypted ledgers, coded casino receipts, and external drives mapping hundreds of transactions routed through offshore accounts. These assets confirmed what the earlier investigation suggested. The Eclipse network was not improvising. Its financial system was engineered to outlast individual arrests. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery came from the personnel lists hidden inside the decrypted drives. 14 police officers, 4 border inspectors, and 2 ICE agents were identified as active participants in the laundering and protection schemes. Each had received payments labeled as training stipends, department bonuses, or campaign contributions, systematically disguising corruption as administrative routine. This revelation forced federal agencies to expand their scope beyond the immediate raids, signaling that the conspiracy had infiltrated institutional structures far deeper than originally believed. If viewers want to understand why the government shifted from enforcement to systemic reform, the next section is crucial, because uncovering the numbers was only the beginning. What investigators found next would expose not only a criminal network, but an entire shadow hierarchy operating beside legitimate authority. But before moving forward, one fact stands firm: numbers don't lie, and these numbers revealed a crisis far greater than anyone dared to imagine. He realized that beneath every massive criminal operation lies a deeper truth. Power is never random. It is structured, layered, and intentionally hidden. The Eclipse network was not merely a cartel pipeline. It was an alternative chain of authority operating parallel to legitimate institutions. Once federal analysts reconstructed the full hierarchy from the decrypted drives, they uncovered a shadow system so meticulously designed that it functioned like a second government embedded inside Texas law enforcement. If viewers truly want to understand how corruption becomes institutional rather than individual, they must stay with this section, because this is where the architecture of power finally reveals itself. The network centered around 3 primary pillars: financial command, logistical control, and institutional protection. At the top stood cartel intermediaries tied to CJNG using shell companies and foreign accounts to manage hundreds of millions in circulation. Below them operated the logistical layer freight companies with dual identities functioning legally by day and transporting hidden narcotics by night. But the most disturbing pillar, the one that held the entire structure together, was institutional protection. Corrupted officers, border inspectors, and deputies whose badges served as shields for cartel operations. Sheriff Miguel Rojas wasn't merely part of this layer, he was its architect. Evidence from the Eclipse files revealed a hierarchy far more complex than initial raids suggested. Mapped diagrams showed 12 shell companies feeding funds into 31 offshore accounts, while encrypted messages linked internal law enforcement units directly to trafficking schedules. Rojas controlled route clearance, surveillance blackouts, and convoy timing. Deputies under his command coordinated safe passage confirmations. Border inspectors allowed undocumented cargo to slip through inspections. Meanwhile, financial analysts on the cartel side monitored wire transfers, payroll spreadsheets, and payout cycles to maintain absolute secrecy. This hidden hierarchy exposed a chilling reality. CJNG's strategy had evolved beyond territorial violence. Instead of fighting for ground, they infiltrated institutions, building loyalty networks within legitimate departments. Officers weren't just bribed, they were integrated into a system where corruption felt routine, even procedural. This method allowed the organization to infiltrate public structures without drawing attention, creating a chain of dependency that turned government offices into operational hubs. Federal investigators concluded that the Eclipse network had achieved structural integration, meaning it no longer relied on isolated corrupt individuals. It operated through coordinated nodes embedded inside official systems. This finding forced authorities to rethink how deeply cartels could penetrate American institutions. If viewers want to understand how a government responds when its own machinery is compromised, the next section is critical. Because once this shadow hierarchy was exposed, the United States had only one path forward: purge the system or lose it. But one fact stands firm here: corruption survives not through chaos but through organization, and Eclipse was organized with frightening precision. He knew that exposing a corrupted hierarchy was only the beginning. The true test came afterward, when a government had to decide whether to cleanse itself or allow decay to spread further. Once the Eclipse network's infiltration was fully mapped, federal agencies understood that they were no longer dealing with a criminal enterprise hiding from the system. They were dealing with a criminal enterprise inside the system. That realization triggered the most significant internal purge Texas law enforcement had faced in decades. If viewers want to understand how a society fights back when its protectors become predators, they must stay with this section, because this is where accountability meets resistance. As agents fanned out, what shocked investigators was not the scale of the drug pipeline, but how deeply it had infiltrated official channels. Dispatch logs, surveillance gaps, escort routes, all orchestrated by the sheriff himself. This was not a rogue officer, it was the head of a system rotting beneath the surface. And if the viewer wants clarity on why this corruption grew unchecked for years, the next section will expose the central crime that blew the entire conspiracy apart. But before moving on, one fact stands firm: corruption does not begin with drugs, it begins with silence, and San Antonio had been silent for too long. The Department of Justice authorized a sweeping institutional cleanup under the codename Project Sentinel. This initiative focused not on street-level crime, but on rooting out public officials, deputies, inspectors, and administrative staff who had assisted the Eclipse network for nearly a decade. Internal reviews of payroll records revealed small but consistent bonus payments disguised as training stipends. Surveillance logs showed unexplained blind spots. Emails and encrypted messages confirmed coordination with cartel intermediaries. One by one, officials who had long appeared untouchable were suspended, indicted, or forced into immediate resignation. Project Sentinel's purpose was clear: rebuild public trust by removing every node of corruption. The purge extended far beyond Bexar County. 14 police officers across Texas, 4 border inspectors, and 2 ICE agents were formally implicated after forensic analysts decoded additional Eclipse data. Entire departments underwent restructuring. Compliance protocols were rewritten. Federal oversight teams were embedded inside local agencies to monitor operations in real time. For many communities, this was the first glimpse of transparency in years. Yet behind the scenes, investigators understood that cleansing institutions was not simply about punishing individuals, it was about dismantling the environment that allowed corruption to grow unchecked. At the state level, policymakers faced mounting pressure from residents who had woken up to helicopters' gunfire and the realization that their sheriff had been funneling cartel money through their own backyard. Public hearings demanded accountability from officials who had ignored warning signs. Advocacy groups called for independent auditing bodies and civilian review boards. The message from the community was unmistakable: never again would blind trust replace real oversight. But purging corruption was not just administrative, it was psychological. The scandal forced officers, judges, and city leaders to confront an uncomfortable truth: loyalty to institutions means nothing unless those institutions remain loyal to the people. Whether viewers believe the system can repair itself depends on their faith and accountability, and if they want to understand how this story concludes and what future consequences still loom, the final section will bring everything together. Yet before moving on, one truth stands firm: a corrupt system cannot cleanse itself quietly, it must cleanse itself completely. He understood that every story of corruption must end with a reckoning, not only for the individuals who orchestrated the crimes, but for the society that allowed such a system to evolve unchecked. As the final reports from Operation Eclipse Counterstrike were compiled, one message became painfully clear. The fall of Sheriff Miguel Rojas was not simply the collapse of a criminal network, it was the collapse of public trust. And rebuilding that trust required more than arrests, audits, and raids. It required an honest confrontation with how power had been abused, manipulated, and weaponized against the very people it claimed to serve. In the aftermath, federal prosecutors released a summary outlining how $100 million in cartel funds traveled through shell companies' offshore accounts and polished business fronts. They documented how Rojas disabled surveillance systems, assigned escort units to cartel convoys, and used his badge as operational leverage for CJNG's US expansion. But the most profound lessons came not from the evidence itself, but from the silence surrounding it. For years, the model functioned because no one questioned the odd transfer labeled as training funds, the late-night warehouse activity, or the sudden blind spots in city surveillance. Corruption doesn't thrive because criminals are brilliant. It thrives because institutions assume their own immunity. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Communities demanded transparency measures, whistleblower protections, and independent review boards. Families who awoke to helicopter rotors and arrest sirens asked a simple question: how long had this been happening right in front of us? Analysts warned that unless systemic reforms were implemented, Eclipse would not be the last network to infiltrate public structures. On social media and local broadcasts, residents debated whether the system could truly be cleaned or whether institutions had already moved past the point of repair. Yet despite the darkness revealed in this scandal, the conclusion also carried a sense of possibility. Project Sentinel continued identifying hidden nodes. Forensic teams kept unraveling encrypted data, and for the first time in years, a broad segment of the public demanded accountability rather than assuming it. He believed that this shift in awareness was itself a victory, a reminder that no badge, no office, and no institution should ever be beyond scrutiny. As the story closes, one question remains: who will be the next to fall, and will society catch the problem before it grows this large again? Share your thoughts below, challenge the narrative, and ask the difficult questions that keep institutions honest. Thank you for watching, and if you want deeper insights into the next phase of Project Sentinel, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is far from over. This investigation uncovers how Sheriff Miguel Rojas transformed his position of authority into the central engine of a massive cartel-aligned network embedded inside Texas law enforcement. What began as a 4:30 a.m. raid evolved into an analysis of encrypted drives revealing 12 shell companies, 31 offshore accounts, and a multi-state drug pipeline protected by corrupted officers. Operation Eclipse Counterstrike mobilized over 700 federal agents across Texas and Florida, leading to record seizures, 2.7 tons of narcotics, 133 firearms, and millions in cash. Yet the greatest damage was institutional surveillance, blackouts, escort routes, and administrative payouts revealed a parallel hierarchy operating beneath legitimate agencies. Project Sentinel, the federal cleanup initiative, worked to dismantle this shadow system by removing compromised officers and restructuring oversight practices. He understood that every major scandal has a core, a moment, or discovery so severe that it forces the entire system to unravel. In San Antonio, that core was not merely the arrest of Sheriff Miguel Rojas. It was the revelation that he had engineered a criminal ecosystem from inside the very department assigned to dismantle such networks. The central event wasn't a single arrest or raid, but the exposure of a hidden economy powered by cocaine routes, cash laundering channels, and protection deals negotiated by law enforcement officers who had long abandoned their oaths. If viewers seek to understand how deeply one man's authority infected an entire region, they should not miss what comes next, because this center point is the key to the entire conspiracy. The scandal forced communities to confront uncomfortable truths about blind trust, institutional decay, and the fragility of public confidence. Ultimately, the case stands as a warning: corruption thrives where accountability fades. Only through vigilance, transparency, and public engagement can society prevent future infiltration. According to federal files, Rojas had built a dual-layered structure, one layer operating publicly as Bexar County's narcotics division and another functioning as the logistical wing of CJNG's Texas expansion. The hidden casino on the outskirts of the city symbolized this duality. Outwardly, it appeared to be an industrial business, licensed, taxed, and even inspected. Internally, it was a cartel command hub equipped with reinforced steel doors, encrypted servers, and rooms used for counting cash flown in from surrounding cities. Multiple crates of money were discovered stacked beside 50 pounds of cocaine fentanyl pills, disguised as prescription medications, and hard drives labeled Project Eclipse. This location confirmed what investigators had long suspected: the sheriff wasn't covering up criminal activity, he was managing it. The true gravity of the situation became undeniable once agents entered the surveillance room, where entire sections of the city's camera grid had been map-timed and programmed to black out minutes before major shipments passed through. Dispatch logs revealed that Rojas had repeatedly assigned his own anti-drug unit to escort the cartel convoys, effectively providing state-sanctioned protection. The core scandal was not that the cartel bribed an officer, it was that a law enforcement leader willingly transformed his badge into the backbone of an interstate trafficking machine. If viewers want to grasp why this case exploded into one of the largest federal crackdowns in Texas history, they must follow the next section closely, because the investigation didn't just expose crimes, it uncovered a sprawling structure far larger than anyone imagined. But one truth stands firm here: when the center of a system is corrupted, every layer above and below collapses with it. He recognized that once the core of corruption is exposed, the investigation must expand outward like a shockwave, revealing not just the criminals, but the architecture that allowed them to thrive. That expansion began the moment federal technicians decrypted the first Eclipse drive, unlocking a financial and operational map that stretched far beyond San Antonio. It was here that the case transformed from a local betrayal into a multi-state transnational conspiracy woven through law enforcement logistics companies and overseas financial hubs. If viewers want to understand how a hidden empire truly functions, they must stay focused, because the next revelations form the spine of the entire narrative. Inside the decrypted files, investigators uncovered a labyrinth of shell companies, 12 in total, each appearing legitimate on paper, complete with employee rosters and tax filings. Yet none had real operations. Instead, these entities served as laundering vessels for more than $100 million routed through Cayman Islands, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands before returning to Texas, disguised as consulting fees or logistics contracts. The names alone, GFR Holdings, Pantex Properties, Ravenark Entertainment, exposed the sophistication of the scheme, each one a facade meticulously designed to blend into the business landscape. This financial architecture confirmed that the conspiracy wasn't improvised, it was engineered.